Halo was once a game that was genre-defining. It was on everyone's mind across the gaming community and was well regarded by most as being one of the best FPSs of all time. Old Bungie created something truly amazing that popularized and set precedent for many features we see in games today. Things like regenerating health, throwing grenades while your weapon's out, and larger scale multiplayer, particularly on consoles. I'm not saying that no other game did that, but certainly none did it as well as Halo. None stood the test of time and were as popular, polished, and easily accessible as Halo. It truly was innovative in an age when most shooters were still working with on-rails vehicle sections and small, arena-styled multiplayer maps. Halo was big and years ahead of its time, quite literally. Then you had Halo 2 in 2004, which brought with it a bigger sandbox, one of the best FPS campaigns of all time, one of the best soundtracks of all time, shout out to Marty O'Donnell, improved multiplayer features, and what I consider to be the true birth of custom game lobbies. But Bungie wasn't done yet. They still, despite some serious difficulties behind the scenes, had much more to do. They wanted to make the most fun game humanly possible. And they made that happen when they dropped Halo 3 in 2007. New features like grander scale campaign levels, an even larger sandbox than ever before, improved multiplayer with what was, at the time, a brand new feature in the form of armor customization available for both Spartans and playable elites. Now, for my younger viewers, or those who simply forgot, I want to point out that those armor pieces you had to unlock not by grinding, not via a credit or debit card, but by doing things in-game. There was an actual incentive to go achievement hunting. An example, beating the game on Legendary granted you the EOD armor. Finding all the skulls got you a sick katana. And I hear if you leave a like on this video, you get recon armor. Halo 3 was absolutely revolutionary for its time in every way. The story was moving, the graphics were beautiful, and the gameplay was second to none. The community and custom game features were there day one, and the level of excitement for this game was justifiably insane. But I'm not done yet, or rather, Bungie wasn't. Halo 3 ODST launched with somehow an even better soundtrack than before, a brand new campaign from a different perspective, and a firefight mode that, like all of Halo's other modes, could be customized and tweaked to your heart's content. Then you had Halo Wars from Ensemble Studios, a controversial title to be sure, but one that nevertheless still stayed true to the Halo theme and aesthetic, and one that is personally one of my favorites. Then last but definitely not least, Bungie went out with a bang when they made Halo Reach, putting almost everything in that they wanted to in the previous games. Now Reach was admittedly a controversial title during its heyday. It was different. Armor abilities left a lot of people stumped and questioning the competitive viability of things like Armor Lock and Jetpack, Bloom was widely hated by the community, including myself, and the campaign, while awesome, didn't quite stack up to the level of scale and impactfulness that we saw before. In hindsight, I think a lot of this came down to simply Halo 3 was hard to beat. But still, Bungie tried their absolute hardest with Reach, giving us features we never got before, all again on day one. Forge World was an absolutely massive canvas built from the ground up to give players the ability to create whatever they wanted in the biggest forge to date. Not a single console game had a feature like this at the time other than Halo Reach. And that was it. Halo. It was finished. For good. Bungie wrapped up the end of Reach's campaign, looping it around to the very beginning of Combat Evolved. Halo's story was over. With the end of the Flood, the destruction of the Ark, and the fall of Reach, Halo's story had been told, front, back, and middle. Master Chief was still floating in space on a cliffhanger ending, but for all intents and purposes, Halo was over. And then 343 took over. And boy, was it a shit show. I'm not going to go into every little detail here, because the last time I did that, the video ended up being over 2 hours long, but right off the bat, there were issues. Art style changes that went so far as to completely change the types of ships and armor being depicted. Firefight was cut from the game, Spartan Ops was in with reused levels, assets, and literal copy and paste dialogue. Multiplayer looked more like a Call of Duty clone rather than a Halo game. And that's all to name just a few of the things that went wrong with 343's first title. Enter their second. Nope, wait, back up, there we go. MCC's original 2014 release. Game released completely broken. Hit detection was drastically off. Connections would constantly drop out. There were random crashes, 2-hour matchmaking times, broken achievements, non-functional custom games, and more. What was 343's response to all this? To call the fans entitled for expecting their $60 product to work. This guy still works at 343, by the way. The worst part is many of these same issues persist today. While it certainly isn't as bad as it was back then, there's still a lot of issues. These are some screenshots from custom games I had just over the last month in 2024. Now let's talk about Halo 5. A tragically awful campaign, a bullshit multiplayer with unbalanced advanced mobility mechanics ripped straight out of Call of Duty, missing Forge mode until 3 months after launch, missing textures until several months after launch. There were literally the Forge maps when it first released didn't actually really have textures. They were just these blank textured blocks, but that's a whole other issue. Missing Infection until 6 months after launch, maps advertised in the trailers that didn't ship with the base game that were then touted as quote-unquote free DLC even though they were just cut from the base game, and to top it off, a blatantly pay-to-win Warzone mode. Add to all of this, and none of it was really new. There was little to no innovation with Halo 4 or Halo 5. Warzone could have been cool had 343 not designed it to be a kill-farming, loot-box-filled grinding simulator, but other than that, it was all the same thing with a different name. Now let's talk Halo Infinite. Before the game even came out, one of the first things we learn is that not only will there be microtransactions, but they will be more expensive than ever before, and they'll be coming in the form of monetized colors. To add to that, it was announced that Halo Infinite was going free to play. Something nobody asked for, only it wasn't completely free to play. You still had to pay $60 for the campaign, which 343 themselves admitted to cutting anywhere between half and 2/3 of it, and you also had to pay for most armor sets at a price point averaging around $15. Yes, $15 that just a few years earlier was something that came with the base game. Halo Infinite as a whole has to be one of the sleaziest, most sloppily put together games I've ever played. You boot up the main menu and you have to load a separate one if you want to play campaign. Everything, including selecting a playlist for multiplayer, is locked behind some kind of loading screen. There are constant pop-ups telling you to check out the store and go buy this bundle or that or whatever. The game, for some reason, constantly has to remind you how woke it is with diversity nameplates and skins anytime there's a special day or week or month or whatever going on. There's very little focus on the actual gameplay of the game. And by the time you make it past the practically infinite loading screens and shop items, it might just decide to crash on you because Halo, I guess. If you load up the campaign, you get a painfully watered down story and a lazy, monotonous open world that again comes off as a sleazy cash grab. Everything in this game feels like a cheap imitation of something it is not. The visuals, the soundtrack, even the gameplay, I know some will disagree with me on this, and that's okay, but to me, the gameplay always felt like a less enjoyable Halo 3. You've got an objectively and significantly smaller vehicle sandbox, a smaller and, in my opinion, worst weapon sandbox, an equipment sandbox where, let's be honest, only the Shroud Shield and Grapple Hook are actually worth using, and maps that for the most part are not the best. Oh, and an extreme over-reliance on user-generated Forge maps. The game literally can't stand on its own 2 feet, and 343 goes out of their way to advertise how many maps the game has, but keeps the fact that they're user-generated maps low-key. They collect the money, while 343 has the fans make the game for them. Did I mention it took them even longer to add things like Infection into Infinite than it did in Halo 5? Now let's talk about the Halo TV show. Nope, not going to go into too much detail. The bottom line is, it's terrible. A $10 million budget per episode for CGI that looked like it was from the early 2000s, and props that looked like they came from Dollar Tree. A separate timeline that nobody asked for, the race swapping of major characters, an awful, and I say again, awful love story between Master Chief, who can't seem to keep his clothes on, and a Covenant human. Wait, what? A Covenant human. Oh, right. The show writers admitted that they didn't even look at the games when writing this crap. Then you had Season 2, which is almost equally as bad. I mean, that flood reveal, they turned the flood into basically normal zombies, more or less, probably because it was cheaper for the budget, but long story short, it was awful. So awful that it got canceled. Thankfully. But they still made 2 seasons. So where does that leave us now? Right. Halo Infinite, for a free-to-play former flagship game, has a abysmal player count, and MCC is filled with over-competitive tryhards that 343 has catered hard to over the last several years, and hackers now. Yup, That's right, hackers are currently banning people from playing the game when they enter matchmaking. What is 343's response to this? Oh, the community manager sits on Twitter all day making dad jokes. Dad jokes. As I said earlier, in addition to the hackers, MCC is plagued by many of the same issues of its original launch, ranging from the game not putting you on teams, custom game settings working incorrectly, random crashes, disconnect, major lighting issues on H2A, hit detection problems, anti-cheat incidents that shouldn't be there, and in some cases it will straight up uninstall some of the games without you asking it to from your hard drive. And that's just a few of the issues that persist on MCC over a decade after it launched. Halo is unarguably in the worst state it has ever been in. The story of the games is disjointed with an over-reliance on extended media, and even if you read them, I've read most of the books, there still isn't a coherent, overarching plot line. At this point, it's more of a disconnected anthology than anything else. As for 343 Industries, the god-awful company in charge of Halo, it's currently being run by a former guy from EA whose resume includes things like mobile games and FIFA. Wow. What a great prognosis for the walking corpse that is the Halo franchise. So we've got a company that's repeatedly displayed it has no respect for the original game's legacy or the fans, no care in the products that they produce themselves, and really no desire to even make Halo. I bring this up a lot, but I think it's very telling, and it may be old news, but it's still relevant. After Halo 4, it was straight up admitted by 343 staff in an interview that they intentionally hired people who hated Halo to make Halo. The thing is, under 343 and Microsoft's direction, Halo has been utterly obliterated in terms of what it was. It's been corporatized to the point where it's unrecognizable. Tell me, does this look like Halo to you? Does any of it anymore? I mean, 343 is so bent on pandering to the quote-unquote broader audience that they are literally making baby toys now. They shoot for a T rating with every game they've released since 4 to make the game more appealing to the younger audience that they know is more likely to buy and tolerate microtransactions. Even the developers of the game don't want anything to do with Halo's old grounded military aesthetic. They'd rather keep releasing overpriced cartoonish microtransactions and have you consuming their imitation slop instead of producing anything meaningful. A big part of the problem here is innovation or the complete lack thereof. I've talked about extensively how I and many others don't like the fact that 343, instead of making their own game, tends to look at whatever's popular and cheaply imitate it. But beyond that, not only is 343 not keeping Halo, but they've also failed to do anything new. They play it incredibly quote-unquote safe by just copying the worst trends of what everybody else is doing. Like I said before, Halo Infinite just feels like a crappy, lower quality cash cow version of Halo 3. Oftentimes, I get accused of just wanting another Halo 3, but that's not what I want. In fact, I don't think that's what anybody wants. If that was the case, MCC's player counts would be a lot higher. If people just wanted Halo 3.5, then MCC would still be super popular, but that's not what's happening. At the end of the day, things get old. You need new stuff. You do need some change. Now, if you ask me what I thought Halo would be like in 10 years back in 2006, I would have said that it probably would have had bigger battles, massive Halo Wars-sized maps with drivable scarabs and pelicans, a mode with playable hunters and grunts and everything in between, something like the original Star Wars Battlefront on steroids with Battlefield Bad Company levels of destructible environments. Sure, we would still have the 4v4 arena game modes, but there would be something bigger as well, a bigger sandbox incorporating most, if not all, of the weapons from previous games. Same thing goes for vehicles. Think about how cool it would be if you're playing a giant invasion match with friends storming the UNSC base with a scarab while AI grunts fight alongside playable elite. Maybe a random person each match spawns in as a hunter and you charge the defenses as the UNSC team sends a Pelican gunship to try and disable the scarab's legs while AI marines and players board it and the other team has to fend them off. Then something crazy happens and flood dispersal pods fall from the sky and the invasion match turns into a firefight match while both teams try to accomplish each other's objectives while also fighting off the flood that turns their former AI buddies into enemies. That would be awesome. Or how about this, a campaign where instead of just roaming around and liberating generic copy and paste bases in 2 different biomes, you instead find a central hub base made up of the wreckage of a crashed Guardian and the Infinity. Then there's a friendly monitor who tells you the Banished want to merge with the Flood or something crazy to get ultimate revenge or whatever. And then Lasky from Halo 4 is there and tells you have to go around and complete side quests, from fetching ammo stashes for the UNSC to taking out Covenant bases. Maybe there's a sub-faction of the Banished that thinks humanity's not actually that bad and then wants to break off and found their own thing, and you work with them, and then you just have to liberate different bases, kind of like you did in Infinite. But just don't make them copy and paste. Make them have unique NPCs. Give us dialogue options. Do something like Fallout does. If you want to copy things so badly, if you want to take things that other franchises do, then do it well. Put some effort into it. Don't just do the bare minimum, but that's basically what 343 does. Maybe instead of just walking around and finding little tech points to upgrade your armor, maybe you could unlock different kinds of armor that would provide different bonuses. Say Recon armor gives you active camo, while Grenadier armor provides a significant health bonus but a slight speed debuff. Anything, really anything, to make the game more interesting and less bland than Halo Infinite. But no, instead we don't get any of that. We just have copy-paste objectives in a world that no matter where you go looks and plays exactly the same. Or on the multiplayer side of things, you have hackers, forge maps, and $30 flood skins. How did Halo get like this? How did it get this bad? Now I know someone's going to comment, well actually Broken Circle, the whole industry is like that, so... No, it isn't. It's literally not. That is not true. Anybody who says that the entire gaming industry sucks, that gaming is just dead, hasn't played that many games. If you go out and look, there are really awesome games out there, newer ones. I mean, sure, you've got things like Call of Duty and Fortnite that, yes, they do follow the same thing as Halo, or rather Halo follows them, because that's what 343 is imitating, to sell out and make a quick buck. But at the end of the day, there are so many good games from the last several years that don't do this. Two games I've been playing somewhat recently that I intend to make full reviews on in the near future is Trepang 2 and Generation Zero, both beautiful games graphically with genuinely unique gameplay elements. But the most important thing about both is that they're unique. They don't try to carbon copy everything that every other game does. Neither really has much in the way of microtransactions, and the DLC they do have is relatively cheap compared to what Halo Infinite has in store. And the thing is, both of these games are made by much smaller teams with far fewer resources than 343. From what I've seen of the 343 employees who call people entitled and say they don't want to make guns in a game that's about shooting stuff, well, it nevertheless leads me to believe that it's not only the company or the management or big bad evil Microsoft that's at fault here, but a lot of the individual developers themselves. A lot of these guys seem to just spend their days on Twitter complaining about crunch, or complaining about how they don't like guns, or complaining about events happening on the other side of the world that don't affect them and saying that's why they can't work. They just seem to be full of endless excuses and no work ethic. And I'm sorry, but I'm just calling it how I see it. Beyond that, the last thing I have to call out is the community. For years and years now, the Halo community, especially over here on YouTube, seems to go through this cycle of overhyping the next game whilst ignoring the blatant red flags. Then when the red flags turn into fires and these community members are no longer reasonably able to feign ignorance, they act like they're being reasonable and tough on 343 by calling them out, even though they called the same people who did that when it wasn't popular to do so toxic and overly negative. They do this because they have this weird, unhealthy attachment like one would in an abusive relationship. At least, that's most of them, I believe. There are the more nefarious ones, without mentioning names here, that I will say they continue doing what they're doing because without Halo, they'd more than likely be working a crappy dead-ends 9 to 5, which, let's face it, nobody wants to do. So, in effect, they have to do this sort of back-and-forth whiplash approach to covering 343's games if they want to continue to put food on the table. Another thing here I think is absolutely hilarious is when people claim that I myself make these types of videos as some sort of monetary gain or internet clout thing, when my top 5 most viewed and therefore by far most profitable videos have nothing to do with Halo. Look, I make content about games I'm passionate about. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but that's that and that's it. At the end of the day, I talk about Halo because I used to enjoy Halo. My wedding ring is literally a Halo ring. If you look at it, it's literally an engraved Halo ring. I was one of the biggest Halo fans ever. But 343 has, in mine and millions of other people's eyes, ruined it. Halo doesn't need to attract a broader audience. It doesn't need these microtransactions to be profitable. It needs to be Halo. It needs to do what it used to do best and innovate, create a cool, fun, and complete product for people to enjoy. That's it. But at this point, with that, I want to say one last thing. I don't particularly enjoy making these types of videos. I have a lot more fun talking about mods like Fallout Vermont or reviewing new games that I get. And even more so, I feel like at this point with these Halo videos, I'm more or less just preaching to the choir in the case of my supporters, or in the case of when the 343 Defense Force posts my videos in their echo chambers, and at that point they can't be helped. Those people need serious help that I am not qualified to give them, nor do I care to give them. The point is, at the end of the day, I'm tired of even acknowledging 343. They are hands down the worst development studio in gaming history. Yes, even worse than EA, and just don't get me started on that. I want to enjoy Halo again, or at least try to. At this point, I want 343 Halo to shut down and be put on ice indefinitely. Put it out of its misery and stop letting these absolute egotistical morons at 343 violate its corpse. It's not just sad, it's disgusting at this point. But like I said, I want to enjoy Halo again. I don't want to complain about it all the time. Playing other games over the last year or so and hosting my own custom lobbies on MCC has made me realize how much I've missed out over the years by being in this weird abusive relationship with 343 and their games. It's time to walk away, so unless there's some major news regarding Halo, I'm not going to be covering anything 343 related in any serious capacity. Halo died with Reach. That's it. It was the last game for me. If 343 or Halo is shelved, then expect a video on it. I still plan to cover Halo content on this channel, just not 343 related content. I want to do some videos on mods, forge maps on MCC, maybe even a few cool montages and the like, but Halo in terms of the future in 343's hands is done for me. I have other games to play, other things to do, and better videos to make, quite frankly. All that being said, if you stuck around to the end of this video, then thank you so much for my long, slightly unhinged rant. Leave a like if you enjoyed, and if those custom games I mentioned before sound like something you'd be interested in, join the channel Discord, a link will be down in the description below. Subscribe if you're new around here, check out my other videos. On the Discord, we like to play some MCC, a little bit of Gen Zero, and recently we've started playing Command & Conquer and Among Us, so join that below and come have a good time. As always, thank you all for watching, have a fantastic day or night wherever you are, stay safe, and #Fire343. Goodbye.